Fore means forward. Aft means at the back end of the ship. So if I was heading forward, which direction would I what would I be heading towards? The bow or the stern? The bow. And I'm heading aft, I'm heading towards the stern. What about if I'm walking across the ship? I'm walking from one side of the ship to the other. I'm heading athwart ships. It'd be much easier to say I'm heading across the ship, wouldn't it? But that it's athwart ships. I'm walking all the way across the ship. And that's what we use on the ships. All right? So you're heading forward. Now, here's the key thing. The one thing you got to learn before you learn anything else when you get to your first ship. Where's the pointy end? Where is forward? Where's the bow? Because everything else relates to that. And you'll see that in just a moment. We just talked about aft. Now there's aft and there's abaft. Aft is I'm going aft. I'm heading towards the rear end. I'm towards the trunk. Okay? Abaft means it's located back there.
The head is abaft of 4 ships.
Okay? Anchor. Sitting up right there. Okay? There's the forward, and that's pretty obvious. That's a gun mount. That one actually does make sense, doesn't it? Okay.
Just kidding, it's still canon.
Okay, flight deck. Flight deck. Now this is different for different ships. The flight deck appears in different places. Here's a flight deck here for a helo. Now on an aircraft carrier, the flight deck you'll see is way up on top. Okay, for example, the flight deck here is up on top. The fantail on a ship is abaft of the flight deck. Remember I said it's a location? So the fantail, which is over here, is abaft of the flight deck. Okay, overhead drawing of an aircraft carrier. The yellow line represents the center line. Okay? Now remember I said you had to remember where the pointy end of the ship was. Where's the bow? Because that determines which direction port or starboard is. Okay? So as you're heading forward, your left is port. And on the right is starboard. But you have to be heading forward. That's how you know somebody's new on the ship. You tell them, hey, I need you to go to the starboard side. And they start walking aft and go to the port side. No, I meant the other starboard. And then they know to turn around and go the other way. So you have to learn where the pointy end is. That's the first thing you have to learn. Then port and starboard is really good for you to learn. You follow me so far? Okay, so everybody raise up your starboard hand.
Yes. Wait, are we heading aft?
We'll assume you guys are facing forward. Your desks are facing forward. For anybody sitting at home, if you're looking at the computer screen, you're facing forward. Okay? If you go from the port side to the starboard side, you're heading towards the center line, the center of the ship. Towards the center line. You're heading inboard. You're going further into the ship, inboard. If you're going from the center line out, you're going outboard. So you're going to the outside of the ship. You're going outboard. Are you guys following me so far? Have I lost anybody?
So if you're going inboard, how do you tell, if you're in the inside of the ship, how can you tell when you've passed the center line?
Well, one way for sure you can tell is if you get wet from the ocean, you've gone too far the other way. Okay? But there are numbering systems on the ship, addresses, that ships use that will tell you the compartment, the deck, the compartment, and then how many doors from centerline that compartment is. How many compartments out is it? So when they want, say, for example, a fire party to go to a compartment, they'll say, fire, 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 Class Charlie fire in compartment 3, TAC 21, TAC 19, berthing. They now know it's third deck, it's at frame 19, and it's the third door out on the starboard side. Okay? You'll get it. All right. What's that?
I'm not going to the Navy.
Joint service. Okay, about the middle is amidships. Okay, amidships. You just go in the middle. The midpoint. Amidships. You're going to go amidship. Okay? The extreme width of the ship, and this is very important. is the beam. Why would the beam be important to a Navy ship?
If you want to go through the Panama Canal, you better be skinnier than it.
Yeah, it would be a good idea if you've got a 55-foot beam and you got a 54-foot area to go through, you'll only make it a little bit through, and then you'll stop. Yeah, so your beam tells you how wide you are. It tells you which harbors you can pull into and which ones you can't, because the harbors are dredged for a certain beam. What phrase means to move toward the stern? You think it's to go aft?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
It's aft.
You want to...
Wait, because stern is in the back.
No, oh.
Stern is the back?
So you have to go aft.
Aft.
Aft. It's aft.
You want to go aft? All right.
Win.
In ship terminology, it's a bulkhead.
Oh, man.
It's a wall.
A wall.
Oh,
No, it's a bulkhead.
That's right, it is a bulkhead.
Yeah, there are no walls in the ship.
All right, now, if you thought this stuff was easy, this is even easier.
Oh, good.
All right. Object stores and equipment are aboard a ship. Crew of a ship lives in or on board a ship. So people you refer to as in or on the ship. Equipment is aboard. You board a ship or go on board because you're a person. Supplies are taken aboard. So people, it's on or in. Everything else is aboard. If you climb the mast, stack, rigging, or any other areas above, so they're talking about all this stuff up here. If you climb any of that, you're going aloft. And they'll actually announce there are men working aloft. Do not rotate or radiate radars. That would be bad for them. Okay, an object hanging over the side of a ship is over the side.
Okay.
Now that makes sense, right? Now, okay, it's getting easier.
Forward fail.
So in this picture, there's fishing nets that are over the side. Now, ship A is off the starboard quarter of ship B. Where's my orienteering guy?
Right here.
Okay. So on ships, there's a whole bunch of compasses all over the place. And when they're talking about the quarter, the ship is divided up, if you divided it in four.
Okay.
I'll hold this ship up. Across here and across here. So,
Oh, so down the center line and down the beam.
yeah.
Oh!
So you're on the port side or the starboard side, either in the front quarter or the back quarter. So that's what they're saying, is they're saying ship A is in the what? Starboard, because if I was on this ship, there's the pointy end of the ship, so I'd be facing forward, starboard side, and he's behind me, so he's in my starboard quarter. Now, this is a little confusing until you realize that the ship in the middle is the manifold. This ship is ahead of the chute, because it's in front of, and it's astern of the other ship. Remember the stern of the ship? The stern of the ship is the back end. So this other ship is astern of him.
Why is it a head instead of a bow? Why is it a head instead of a bow then? If it's a stern, why is
Because
it
you
a
never
bow?
avow in the Navy. You only get-
Because it's talking of, I know what you're talking about. Right? Okay, just to make things even worse, you eat lunch in a galley. It's not the kitchen, it's the galley.
Okay.
And actually the galley is where you cook. You eat in the mess decks. Just walk through there after lunch and look on the ground. You'll see why they call it a mess deck. Okay? Supplies and equipment are taken aboard a ship. Very good. Be bad if it came up inboard, wouldn't it? All right. Structural terms. Now, this is a dry dock. Okay? And so right on the other side of this wall is the ocean. And the ocean is up maybe a foot or two below this wall. So what happens is they're going to bring a ship in. They build this thing called a build. And they lay these things out, and they're all laid out. Every board here is laid out to within 1/8 of an inch of where it needs to be when the ship is sitting on it. They flood this whole thing, and there's a man walking right here, if you can see him. So you can see how big this dock is. They flood it full of water. Then they remove this gate. So now the ocean comes all the way in. They pull the ship in. Remember that beam we were talking about? Very important that the ship fits between here. They maneuver it into place, and then they begin to lower it, and they use cables to center the ship on this build so it can go into dry dock. So let's talk about some of those structural terms.
Units are built and outfitted with the variety of systems they will hold. Here, curved and flat plates are laid out, then welded together. This shell plating will form the base of an inner bottom unit. Welders and ship fitters now install floors, webs, and girders as the structure of the unit begins to take on its three-dimensional shape. With basic structural members in place, pre-outfitting, the installation of systems, can take place. Once assembly and pre-outfitting of the unit are complete, the unit is ready to be erected on the building lays. After the unit is in place, various systems can be tied together. Piping, for example, is joined from one unit to the next. During the unit erection stage, some special installations are made. The engine room outfit package is too large and heavy for unit pre-outfitting. The package, consisting of 2 huge gas turbine engines and reduction gears on a common foundation, weighs over 190 tons. Shafting and propellers are installed as supporting units are ready to receive. Ground erection sites are used for units too large to be assembled indoors. These deckhouse units have undergone the same assembly and pre-outfit processes as smaller units constructed inside. An Aegis ship is designed and built in sections, which are lifted onto the building ways via a giant crane. These sections are then connected as the ship grows and takes shape.
So it's basically Legos.
Has a crane ever broken and dropped one of those pieces?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the backbone of the ship is the keel. That's the very bottom of the ship. So on this little model, you can kind of see where the seam is. That would be the keel, the very bottom of the ship.
How thick is their armor? Like steel plates?
We will talk about each individual ship, but it depends on what the ship's mission is. Some ships have very little armor at all because their mission doesn't require them to have the armor. Or the armor is too heavy for the speed we need, so it's the maximum thickness we can get, but still have the speed we need for the mission of the ship. So there's hull plating, which is supporting the ship, and then you have these frames in here. Oh, and there's a room, a compartment. So here you can see a ship is being built. This is a gun turret right down here. You can see that circular gun turret. This part way out here is the hull. This part here is a tank or a void for oil or fuel, maybe even water. This airspace right here is designed in there to give some separation. So that if a torpedo hits, it hits out here. It dumps the fuel, but the explosion goes that way and not into the ship. Okay? Transverse bulkheads are bulkheads that go across warthward ships. So transverse frames go what? Across the ship. They're the ribs. Okay? They're the rib cage. Okay. Remember we talked about bulkheads. Okay? Now in bulkheads there are things called doors, but they're not called doors. Okay, they're called watertight compartments. Now, you can see, they're not called watertight compartments, but they're called watertight doors, and you'll see that in a minute. That is leading into a compartment. Okay, we just talked about those tanks. We talked about these tanks over here, and those voids. So we have outer tanks and inner tanks. And it's so that if a torpedo hits the ship can survive. It would be different if all the fuel was right next to where the people were, right? You don't want the fuel in the people tank when you get hit by a torpedo.
Yeah.
That would be bad. Waterline. This is pretty easy. Where do you think the waterline is? Where the ship sits in the water, it's right down to where the water is. That's the waterline. Even I got that one. Draft. Okay, so the red area. You can see the red area on that ship that's being sent around. You can see it on this one here. And you can see the draft here. It's below the waterline. It's the distance between the waterline and the ocean, and the bottom of the ship, the keel, the backbone of the ship. That's important because you need to know how deep you're drawing water. For example, to go into Pearl Harbor. To go into Pearl Harbor, some ships can't go in except at high tide. The water needs to be up high enough that you can get through the mouth of the harbor. When the tide goes down, the ship can't fit through. It's stuck in the harbor till the next high tide. Freeboard is the distance you're going to fall from falling off the ship into the water. That's the easiest way to figure it, right? Okay? From the main deck to the waterline is freeboard. That's the way I learned it. Free fall off the ship, freeboard. The backbone of the ship is what? The keel. Okay? So what is the
Thwart ships.
thwart ships? Is that your favorite word?
It's my new favorite.
Try to use it 3 times today without losing the person you say it to. Okay? So while you're walking athwart ships in your classrooms to get to your seats, okay, decks are the floors. There are a lot of decks. For example, an aircraft carrier has 17 decks. It's a 17-story tall ship. By the way, does anybody know how long an aircraft carrier is?
Long enough.
Does anybody play football? You play football. Okay. What do you play?
Defensive end.
Defensive end. So you don't like to run from one end of the field to the other. You'd get a little winded.
A lot
Okay.
winded.
A lot winded. How would you like to run the distance of 3 football fields and then some? You get really winded.
That's good work.
Okay. Berthing compartment. No, that's not where people are berthed. It's where you sleep. That's the bedroom, the berthing compartment. And where do you sleep? Do you sleep in a bed? No, you sleep in a berth. Okay? And the mess deck is where you eat.
Question.
Now, a Navy ship, yes.
Do they have watertight compartment doors?
They have watertight compartment doors.
To
that are
everything?
Specific, not to everything.
No, to everything below.
To each
water.
compartment.
Oh, okay.
But a space within a compartment might not have a watertight door.
Okay, so from the berthing compartment to the head, there might not be a watertight door. But
Depends on the ship.
But from the passageway to the berthing compartment, there would be a watertight door.
Normally not the passageway to the berthing compartment. On a submarine, there's a water. The only doors they have are the watertight doors.
Okay.
Okay. Weather deck. If you're outside, you're in the weather, that's a weather deck. Pretty easy, isn't it? Okay.
Can a weather deck be a flight deck?
Weather deck can, yeah, it's outside, isn't it?
Oh, but you can use them either term, or is it
No, you would say
deck?
flight deck. You would say flight deck. So, for example, here's a carrier flight deck, okay? So, on an aircraft carrier, the uppermost complete deck is the flight deck. And you can kind of get a flavor for how big it is because these are all people walking around.
Oh, man. They're like ants.
For every other ship, the main deck is what? The uppermost complete deck is the main deck. Because there are decks below the carrier that are actually complete decks too. On an aircraft carrier, the hangar deck is the main deck. The hangar deck is where the aircraft are stored and serviced. So they can actually move the entire air wing down inside the ship. So we're talking about approximately 80 aircraft between the attack and the reconnaissance and the refueling and the helos. Everything can fit into the hangar bay. There's 3 main parts to the hangar bay. So you can see there's one jet right here. What they're doing right now is they're bringing supplies on from another ship. That's how you get your supplies. Because another ship will come out, meet the carrier, they'll pull up alongside, and then they'll send cables between the ships, hook
Is
them
there
up.
a special name for what that's called too?
Yeah, it's underway replenishment. UNREP, underway replenishment.
Okay.
It's a really fun, exciting operation. A deck exposed to the elements, such as rain and wind, is called the weather deck. You guys are ready to go.
Poop deck. What's the poop deck? What is the poop deck?
We'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, ladders lead from one deck level to another, not stairs. Ladders. Okay, you can go up and down a ladder. And many are covered by hatches. So when you go up, there's a little hatch at the top that you got to go through. And it's always a good idea to look before you go up, because you'll knock your noggin every time because somebody's closed the hatch.
What if somebody closes the hatch on me?
It hurts. Okay. Forecastle. Okay, it's pronounced forecastle. The forecastle. It's a forward portion of the weather deck. Okay. The poop deck is a partial deck above the main deck, all the way aft. So now you have the answer to the poop deck. Quarterdeck. This is an important one. Quarterdeck. It's not actually a deck. It's a location. It's a ceremonial location where people come onto the ship. Okay, the quarterdeck. Okay. So here's a hatch. Remember I said it hurts if you go up the ladder? Well, if they close the hatch, this little ring right here, this thing is sticking down. So if you forget it, you're going up thinking you can go right up to the next level. Bam! It hurts. You can see stars. And that's a door.
So, do they ever leave hatches or doors open?
Yes, the hatches and doors are left open. And then depending on what you're going through, let's say, for example, you go to general quarters, right, because you're in a battle situation. Then all of these things get closed down, and we use different things to tell us what we do with it. For example, there's a Z on here, and there's a Z on here. That tells you, depending on the threat, what you do with that device. There's an X on this one. So that you would treat this differently than you would treat this. And it's all because you want to make sure that depending on what you're going against, what you don't want is water in the people tank. And you don't want a lot of water in the people tank, so by closing these watertight devices, you can limit the flooding on the ship. So that some compartments can get flooded, but you won't sink. Okay? All doors leading to weather decks are of the watertight variety. That would make sense. You don't want it out in the ocean. Okay? The doors are held closed by fittings called dogs. These are all dogs. Okay? And then somewhere near the door, there's a wrench. Okay? The Navy calls it a wrench. It's a dogging wrench. It's really a pipe. And that's how you move these. You slip the pipe on there and you tighten it down. Which of these objects give access through decks? Hatches, you are correct. Okay. Ship size, displacement. It's how much water the ship pushes when it sits in the water. It's the same as if you were able to put it on a bathroom scale. Right? But the scale would have to be pretty big. That's the displacement. The weight or volume of water that a ship displaces when afloat. Okay? So, for example, an aircraft carrier is 97,000 tons. And then the way they say it in the Navy is 90,000 tons of diplomacy. Okay? Ship identification. USS. United States Ship. And then there's a name. This one happens to be Nimitz. CVN designates that it's a carrier and it is nuclear powered. 68 indicates the number of that type of ship that has been built. So the Nimitz is the 68th aircraft carrier the United States has built. A ship's hull number never changes unless its designation changes. So, for example, we take a ship and we build it for one purpose, and then we convert it to something else. The USS Langley, the first aircraft carrier, wasn't built as an aircraft carrier. It was built as a coal ship. And then they threw a deck on top of it. So then it changed from being what it was to a new designation. The right is the same way. Armaments. That has to do with offensive weapons. And then armor means protective armor. Things to protect you from incoming threats. Ship speed is given in knots. Never knots per hour. A knot includes that. So it's an abbreviation, knots. Okay? So for example, this ship's speed is 42 knots, which would be about, I think, maybe 45, 46 miles per hour, maybe a little bit more. Okay? 48. Okay? So that's what a knot is. So when you're traveling, you'll say, give me 25 knots. And that's what you're going to get. You're going to get turns for that on the propeller.
5 minutes.
Okay? What term refers to the offensive weapons on a ship, such as guns and rockets? Armaments. Any questions? No questions at all.
I have
Yes.
a question. On the hull, why do they have the oil and the water on the outside and then have a void on the second layer?
How do you sink a ship?
Fill it with water.
And how do you fill it with water?
Put a hole in it.
Poke a hole in it. So if you put all that oil and water on the outside of the ship, then when the torpedo comes in, the first thing it hits is all that oil and water. And so it absorbs the shock of that explosion. And so the explosion goes out away from the ship. And the torpedo doesn't get through the hull into where the people are and where all the equipment is. That's what those other bulkheads are for. So that void in between the two, that space, it helps take up that implosion that happens so that you don't end up flooding. So for example, the coal, when they blew up the little boat right next to it, it didn't sink the coal. It did punch a hole in it, but it didn't sink it. Okay?
So it's very hard to sink a Navy ship.
It's hard to sink a Navy ship. The best idea is to get underneath it and blow up something so that you can break its back. Break the keel and make it to where it breaks apart in half. And then it'll go. So what you actually do is blow the water out from under it. There's nothing supporting it in the middle, so it bends and breaks.
Okay.
Okay? Any other questions? We didn't even talk about submarines.
What'd you do in the Navy?
What did I do in the Navy? I was a nuclear power guy. I was enlisted for 12 years. I enlisted and I worked my way up through the ranks. The Navy's got a program called Limited Duty Officer where the top enlisted people can apply for a commission, and then based on your enlisted record, you'll go in front of a board and they'll commission you as a naval officer. The difference is, as a limited duty officer, I could not be in command of a combatant vessel. That's the only difference. I could be in command of say a dry dock ship or something like that, but I wouldn't be in command of a dry dock vessel. So after 12 years of enlisted service, I went and got commissioned, and then I went up through the nuclear power ranks. I was on fast attack submarines, fleet ballistic missile submarines, aircraft carriers, and repair ship. And then shore duty was mostly repair, mostly having to do with the reactor plants. So that's what my expertise was, nuclear power.
Is there a limit to how high you can be promoted as a LDO?
There is a limit, and it's 06. And typically, like for example, in my rating, in my job category for nuclear power, there's one in the Navy. So you look at it and you think, do I really want that job? Do I want to hang around to get that? Some people do. I had a friend of mine. He was a limited duty officer. He was the Navy's 106 nuke LDO. He spent 40 years in. So he went from E1 to E8, got commissioned as an ensign, went from ensign to captain. So he went through quite a few ranks.
How?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Any other questions? No? We're good.
Alrighty, Cadet Madigan, why don't you dismiss to the class, please?
Room, halt! You're dismissed.